Hello again, youngins. Ranger Bill here. You might notice that, or those lighthouses there in the distance behind me. These are the lighthouses at Cape Henry. This one right here is the oldest of the two. I won't tell you the date because that'll be revealed in the story. And the other that you can just barely see in the distance, the black and white one, is the newer of the two lighthouses and the actual operational lighthouse for right now. And it's well over 100 years old. The old one, of course, was here when I was a kid. I've been up in it many, many times. I've secretly wanted to be up there in a big thunderstorms, but have yet to do so. I saw it every week when we came here to go to church, and I saw it quite a bit as a kid running around this army post during the 60s and 70s, and so it's near and dear to my heart. You'll notice that I picked the west side, A, so the sun would light it up, B, because I'm out of the wind behind the hill that it stands on, and C, because the picture in the book is from the same angle, and you can see the narrow windows going up the lighthouse. And those narrow windows are only on this side. The door to the lighthouse is on the southern exposure, and the rest of it is solid brick all the way up to the light, which is a pretty good view, by the way. So let's read that. The lighting of Cape Henry Lighthouse. It was Thanksgiving Day in the year of 1792. Jack McComb sat on the old shipwreck on the beach near Cape Henry, Virginia, in the warm sunshine. It did not feel like November, and the sea was calm. Up the beach, about a mile, he could see the lighthouse his father had just finished building. It looked beautiful atop the high hill, and Jack was proud as he looked at it. He had spent nearly 2 years at Cape Henry and had seen the stones hauled from the beach and carried up the hill and seen the foundation laid. As more stones were fitted into place each month, he could climb up the wooden steps a little higher and look out the narrow windows. Jack had done all sorts of odd jobs helping the workmen. He worked for his father. When the keeper's home was finished, he and his father moved in, and his mother and twin sisters came out from Norfolk, and Jack no longer camped with the workmen. A few months before the work was completed, Mr. Goffigan, who was to take care of the lighthouse, and his wife and son Bob moved to Cape Henry. Jack and Bob were both 14 years old and had many adventures together. Jack was glad to have a friend his own age and not to have to play with his sisters. He was waiting for Bob as he sat looking at the high tower that was the lighthouse. It was hard to believe that at long last this important day had come. When his father first began his work, he had promised Jack that the first time the light on the top of the house burned at night, Jack would light it, and tonight was to be that night. When he looked around, he saw the beach cart far down the coast, and he saw that Bob had finished the errand for his mother. There were no stores in those days, so Bob had driven to Macon's plantation to borrow some extra flour and had brought back Mrs. Macon and her sister to help Miss Goffigan prepare the Thanksgiving dinner. There was a boatload of important people coming out from Norfolk to see the light go on for the first time. After that, Jack's father would turn over the lighthouse to the Goffigans, and the McCombs would go back to Norfolk. Bob waved as he passed the wreck and yelled, "Stay where you are, Jack. I'm going up to the beach and you can go with me." In a few minutes, he was back, and Jack climbed up in the high two-wheeled cart, and off the boys went past the lighthouse and toward Lynnhaven Inlet. They had a fine time talking about all the fun they had when they had gone to Currituck Sound and camped on the beach, and of all their fishing and hunting experiences. Jack was sad about leaving Cape Henry, and soon he would have to be packing up all the treasures he had found during his stay at the shore. All of a sudden, Bob said, "There comes the boat from Norfolk. We will have to get back and help unload the people and the supplies." The sailing vessel moved along in the sunshine and dropped anchor just offshore inside the cape. If it had been a rough sea, they would have anchored at Lynnhaven, and everybody and everything would have had to come to the cape in the beach carts. The boys tied the mule to the beach cart to a tree near the shore, and took a rowboat out to unload the visitors and the supplies for the lighthouse keeper. It took many trips back and forth to carry all of the McCombs' things to the boat. Then, there was the big Thanksgiving dinner. By the time everyone had eaten roasted oysters, turkey and ham, pies and cakes, and the women had cleared everything away, it was late in the afternoon. The sun had gone down over the white sand dunes and stretched for miles along the coast. The visitors climbed the hill near the lighthouse, and Jack and his father went up the wooden steps. They had put some red hot coals in an iron pot, which he carried to the room at the very top of the tower, where glass windows around the light reflected the setting sun. Mr. McComb gave Jack a small stick, which he placed in the coals and blew until the end of the stick caught fire. The big lantern was opened, and Jack very proudly indeed lighted the wick. He did not wait for his father, but tore down the steps 2 at a time so that he could get outside and see what it looked like. He and Bob ran down the beach toward the wreck as the crowd cheered and began to sing a hymn. Jack would never forget the sight of as he watched the winter darkness come, and high up in the lighthouse, the lamp which he had lighted cast its glow across the water where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Chesapeake Bay. Before long, he heard his father call, and the two boys ran back to the keeper's house. The rowboats were carrying the visitors out to the sailing vessel. A breeze had sprung up, and the sea was getting choppy. Lanterns on the ship reflected the dark water. Jack waited for the last boat, which carried his father. This had been a happy job, and they both hated to leave their lighthouse, Bob said. Bob said, "Goodbye. See you next summer," Jack replied. "I'll be back," as he climbed aboard. There were more calls of goodbye as the sailing vessel pulled up anchor and headed west into the bay. Bob Gofkin felt the loneliness of the deserted beach as the sailboat disappeared into the darkness. Jack, on board, stood at the stern of the ship for a long time with his father beside him, watching until he could no longer see the light which the boy had kindled. That light in the Cape Henry Tower would for nearly 100 years be a guide to ships for many nations. There was a poem about Cape Henry Lighthouse written by Miss Fanny Pretlow of Franklin, Virginia, long before the granite cross was placed at Cape Henry to mark the landing place of the first English settlers. It reads, "Could they return from out of the drifting years? Who planted here a cross? Could they look shoreward to allay their fears? Not that sad symbol would arrest their sight, but gleaming high a crown of light." The historical background. In the days before there were many people living along the waterfront of Virginia Beach, there was no radar to guide the ships and no ship-to-shore phone. It was difficult, especially at night, to find the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. The small sailing vessels that went back and forth between the colonies of Maryland and Virginia badly needed a lighthouse at Cape Henry. As early as 1660, in the House of Burgesses in Jamestown and later in Williamsburg, the lawmakers of Virginia began to plan with the state of Maryland to build a lighthouse at the entrance of the Chesapeake Bay. They talked about it for more than 100 years and appointed a committee of directors, including several people who lived in Princess Anne County. But it was not until 1774 that they began to move material to Cape Henry in preparation of the lighthouse. Some things never change. Then the Revolutionary War came and nothing could be done. Since the lighthouse was not available, the people in charge ordered that a pole 50 feet tall be put up and a white flag striped with red be flown except when there were British ships within the Cape. At night, there was a light placed at the top of the pole. Evidently, people began to live at Cape Henry to take care of these orders and to protect the material that had been assembled for the construction of the lighthouse. After the Revolutionary War was over and the new government formed, the first president of the United States, George Washington, signed the bill of the first Congress that a lighthouse and a home for the keeper of that lighthouse be erected near the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. The state of Virginia gave 2 acres of land, and in 1791, John McComb Jr. was given the contract to build the first lighthouse for the new federal government. The cost of the lighthouse and the keeper's home was $17,500, which was a lot of money in those days. It took a year and a half to finish the buildings. This lighthouse was used until 1881, when the new one was built. The new one being the black and white one there in the distance, and the one where the U.S. Coast Guard is currently stationed and actively operating the lighthouse. All right, so there's another one of the stories out of the Witch of Pungo. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to move on south to another location for another reading and try to stay ahead of the sun. Otherwise, I'll have to come back tomorrow. Darn the luck. So you guys have a wonderful day. Keep growing. Keep experiencing. Keep writing your own narrative, all right? Love you guys. Peace.